Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick O'Toole. Uh, I am the co-owner and editorial director of Qualified Remodeler magazine. Um, you may know us best by our annual ranking of the largest remodeling and home improvement firms called the Top 500. I'm very pleased today to moderate this panel discussion among technology leaders in the home improvement space. Our topic today is overdue. It is tech's supporting role for home improvement pros during and post COVID-19. By now, we know technology is playing a very significant role in helping home improvement CEOs and managers keep their businesses moving today, helping overcome stay-in-place orders, social distancing guidelines, and a myriad of safety concerns. But until now, we haven't unpacked all of those possible impacts of tech on home improvement in the age of COVID. Nor have we discussed tech's impact on our industry in a rapidly approaching post-COVID world. For the next 45 minutes, we're going to have that conversation. And we will be doing it with some of the industry's top tech leaders. Chris Batch, CEO of Hatch, Chris Palatroni, co-founder of Modernize, Thomas Bosch, Strategic Partnerships Managers at Leap, Tim Mush, Director of Business Development at MarketSharp, and Anthony Gohn, CEO of Hearth. Each of them will introduce themselves and their companies in just a moment, but before we get started, I wanted to share some general observations about the impact of technology on home improvement over these last 9 or so weeks. It's clear the long-term landscape of remodeling and home improvement is being reshaped by technology right in front of our eyes. And on the other side of this, when we get there, there will be winners, there will be stragglers, and many, many companies will be gone, unfortunately. And I'm talking about home improvement companies. We saw this in 2008, and we're seeing it again now. Those firms embracing technologies prior to the pandemic found themselves with a fighting chance in March and April. Those playing tech catch-up are having a harder time. All of the panelists today were offering a better way to conduct business prior to the pandemic. Their tech-based platforms and services offer positive business impacts in any environment. And we're talking about dynamic increases in productivity among your workers, palpable increases in employee satisfaction, and measurable increases in customer satisfactions that ultimately translates to lower overall lead costs, more good reviews, better word of mouth, and stronger brands. So all of these benefits are more true today as the country begins to safely unravel its closures, albeit step by step. So let's have that conversation today. I'll be moderating your panel discussion, and there will be an opportunity for everyone who's on the call today to go to their panel and type in questions that we can get to at the very end. So I encourage you to enter your questions, and we'll try to get to them before we wrap up our conversation. And now I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves one by one, and I'm going to start with Chris Batch, CEO of Hatch. Chris?
Thanks, Patrick. My name is Chris, co-founder and CEO of Hatch, and Hatch is a business messaging platform for home improvement companies. We've been around for a little under 5 years, but we really help home improvement companies with the customer journey, not just using technology, but what to say when are the right times to engage a lead, how quickly, when are the right times to do rehash, and when are the right times to communicate with your customer post-sale. That's some of the stuff that we're helping companies with.
Got it. And anyone can go next, but why don't we go with Chris Palatroni, co-founder of Modernize.
Hey guys, Chris Palatroni, one of the co-founders of Modernize. We do digital marketing, essentially connecting homeowners to contractors for just a a few home improvement projects with windows, roofing, HVAC, and solar. And really my role in the company is to support our more enterprise clients. And so the core of the business is really making the matchmaker connection between the homeowner and the contractor. But I'd say probably the greatest value we really provide to clients is a little bit of what Chris touched on, doing a better job with the journey, kind of the touch points through that process, and just making sure guys are getting the most out of their marketing. So kind of the tactics and best practices, if you will, to turn leads into customers. So overview of what we do.
Thomas Bash from Leap, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. And I think it's a good transition because I pick up a lot of where the other people on here hand off to us. And what we do is digitize the entire in-home sales process. So, think from the time that you pull up into the driveway of that customer to the time that you leave that customer's driveway. Leap works in that process. So, digitizing estimates, contract proposals, facilitating financing, and showing resources, company story, before and after pictures, all the things that you do during that sales process. So that's where Leap fits in.
Got it. Thank you. Next up is Tim Mush with MarketSharp.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Tim Mush, Director of Business Development at MarketSharp. And what we do is we've created a CRM for the home services industry. Been around for a while. If you look over my shoulder, you see a Macintosh computer back there. And actually, the first version of MarketSharp was created on that computer. That's how long we've been around. And me. So, yeah, we've been doing this for quite a while. And, what's really neat is these technology solutions we're going to talk about today. One of the challenges is to make them all work together. And one thing we worked hard at MarketSharp is making the core of your business, which is your CRM and your data, work seamlessly with a lot of the tools that are being represented on this panel discussion. So happy to be here.
Got it. Last and certainly not least is Anthony Gohn, CEO of Hearth.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I'm Anthony. I started Hearth, which is a financing tool for small business contractors. So we brought to market a tool that allows contractors to offer up to 13 lenders to their customers without getting charged $1 in dealer fees. And any contractor can sign up with no underwriting. So that's what we do, especially right now where a lot of people are hesitant to dive into their savings. We have a lot to share about insights and learnings over the last 8 or 9 weeks. I'm excited to get into it.
Thank you, Anthony. Okay, so everyone's introduced themselves now. And what we'd like the audience to do is take a quick poll. And if you look in your panel, there is a question that's going to emerge real quickly here. And that question is, on a scale from 1 to 5, how well do you think you're adopting technology in your business today? So as that poll arises, we're going to let those results come in. We're going to report them back to everybody. So keep putting those in there. And while those answers are coming in, I'm going to begin with a question for our panel. And we're going to go one by one. And the overall question is this. How have each of you seen the usage of your product change since COVID began? And we're going to start in 1 second with Modernize. And let me submit a vote because that's how I'm going to see it. And so, basically the results are up on the screen now. If you can see them on a scale of 1 to 5, I think most people are in that 3, 4, and 5 bucket. So a good group of heavy adopters, if I'm calling that right. And I'll let you folks interpret that. So I'd like to throw it over to Modernize and just ask real quickly, have you seen an impact on lead flow and contractor usage since COVID began?
Yeah, no, great question. As a business, we really service 2 different customers. We have the homeowner side of our business, which is homeowners reaching out to us, expressing interest in getting an estimate for one of the 4 categories we service. And then on the other side of that, we deal with contractors, about 500 throughout the country, who are looking for leads and opportunities for their business. And so I'd say on the contractor side, we're seeing 50-50, right? There's been some companies that require more demand. There's some that require less demand. My job is to try to figure out why, what's the consensus. And I would boil it all the way down to some companies are looking at this as an opportunity to kind of take advantage of market share, grow their business, get in while it's easier. I like to say winning by default, if you will. And others are just playing a little bit more reserved. And based on that mindset dictates their need a lot. Obviously, certain things aren't digital. Canvassing, events, we all know those are kind of dried up. So there is a need for leads to an extent, but that's really based on the need of the business and how much they're trying to push it. On the homeowner side of things, we've noticed just a little dip. So homeowner demand is very strong. We generate about 200,000 leads per month. And so we've noticed just a little bit of a dip from a homeowner perspective. I'd say the biggest change from our lens is really on the contracting side.
Thank you. So this next question is for Hatch and Leap, and I'm going to start with Chris at Hatch. How has communication changed between the contractor and the homeowner? And then you can pick it up from there, Thomas.
All right, guys. Hopefully you can hear me. I've got a little bit of technical difficulty. I think everybody on my neighborhood's on Wi-Fi this morning. Yeah, I mean, we've seen our technology change rapidly. Just to give you some stats that I think are fascinating. Our business messaging platform primarily at first was used to do rehash or quote follow-up. And then all of a sudden, quote stopped, right, because of COVID. And just last week, we tracked over 500 virtual appointments used through our business messaging platform. On February 5th, there was 0. So home improvement companies went from 0 virtual appointments to 500 a week in less than a month and a half. I think it's insane when you think about it. But I also think that we'll continue to see a portion of the business that will continue that way, where people are still going to want virtual. It's just easier in some cases. And what we're trying to figure out now is, how do you get the close rate just like face-to-face? Because virtual appointments don't close as well, but there's an opportunity to figure that out. And I think it's exciting. And we've seen a big change there just in the past month. I mean, that's one of the big ones that sticks out.
Got it. Thomas?
Yeah, it's great. And I think Chris is perfectly positioned to speak to communication, between homeowners and contractors. I think really what we've seen at Leap is there's really a big difference between a remote estimate and, say, a virtual experience, right? So a virtual experience is being able to provide the same level of service and the same experience you would get face-to-face, but doing it virtually. So not to be confused with just simply emailing a price and hiring a contractor that little to nothing about. So contractors really need to step up and make sure that they're not just doing remote estimates, but that they're actually providing virtual experiences to their prospective buyers. And so what we've seen is really a double down from contractors on wanting to make sure that they're spending the time to implement those technologies and that system, so that they're not just prepared for today and being able to share a screen and go through the application, go through a sales process, but also doing it self-audit and realizing steps in their process that were maybe inefficient and ways that they could better automate those things. And just one stat I wanted to share too is that last month we have an integration with DocuSign, and we saw a 2.5 to 3x jump on that year over year. So we know that customers are facilitating transactions still, albeit virtually.
Got it. So Anthony, tell us how this has all impacted financing requests.
So there's been a number of things that I thought were fairly interesting, and I prepared to share. So I think the number one thing that we were all surprised to see the extent of was the amount of financing requests that we processed jumped about 250% from March to April. So what we observed was that a lot more customers are interested in evaluating monthly payment alternatives to the project costs. And for us, it was a record month. At the same time, what we saw on the lender side, and you probably see this across Green Sky, Synchrony, Wells Fargo, Chase and Wells Fargo not offering home equity lines anymore, is that the credit market is really figuring out how it's going to play in a post-COVID world. And so we saw some lenders who completely stopped, lending or really reduced it, say 90, 95%, and then some lenders that captured the space that they created. So overall, what we did see, it's been changing rapidly. So I would say there was a period of time where instead of seeing an average of 25 options when somebody applies through Hearth, they saw 13. Now it's back up to 25. The rates have stayed pretty consistent. Certain lenders have become more dominant, certain ones have pulled back. But the number one thing we've seen is that both in terms of contractors signing up for Hearth, but also homeowners applying via their contractors on Hearth, we've seen really records as people understand the value of breaking it down into monthly payments. One more thing that I thought was fairly interesting is that the Hearth allows you to offer financing without being in the home. So you can send a link to your customer, and then you get tracking to tell you exactly how much they got qualified for, where they are in the process, et cetera. And the rate at which people were offering financing in the home went down, obviously 65%. And we've seen that more than made up, like link sends, emails, text messages, things of that nature. To be adapting.
Got it. Thank you, Anthony. And Tim from MarketSharp, how have you seen a change on lead pipelines over this period of time?
Yeah, it's been interesting, Pat. We're real fortunate here at MarketSharp because we have thousands of some of the best home services companies in the country that use a CRM, which gives us access to about $3.3 billion worth of installed home improvements, which is a lot. So what we can do is we can dive into that data and see what's going on in the aggregate. And it's really been quite interesting. We've been tracking this since the COVID thing began. And let me just say this, the trends, are definitely on the upward swing, week to week from that. The most recent data we pulled compared activity this particular week compared to this week last year in 2019. And here's what we learned. It'll probably stun some of you. Number of leads generated in 2020 as compared to 2019 is at 97%.
Wow.
That's quite amazing. Now, it does drop off in terms of demos and revenue and so forth, but the number of leads that are being generated, and I think the folks at Modernize will probably attest to this, there's consumers out there that are at home, they're looking at their home, and they're digging around. They really are. So the top of the funnel is certainly being fed in that area. Number of demos in 2020 compared to 2019 for this week was at about 60%. So that's down. I think that's understandable because of social distancing and so forth. Net revenue, it's at 63% of 2019. And what we saw is a big revenue increase from week 16 compared to week 17. And that's what we're analyzing now. And a 22% jump just from last week to the previous week. So we're seeing those trends continue to move up in terms of the activity and in the conversion process of these leads. So it's all very encouraging, actually. The top of the funnel is definitely being fed by consumers digging around, and it's up to us to try to figure out how to blend into that and get it into the conversion process of our business.
Well, Tim, I'm going to keep it with you for a moment then as we pivot our conversation on some tangible advice for home improvement pros that are out there listening and who will listen to the recording afterward. So, briefly, what's one piece of advice you would offer a home improvement pro right now, given what you just said?
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of advice going around. I think there's been more educational webinars shown within the past few weeks than ever.
Right.
So those of you that are on the webinar are to be commended for being here because you've probably been inundated with this stuff. But in terms of tangible advice, here's my advice. Carve out your market share here. Because here's what happened. I was kind of amazed, or maybe not amazed, that when this whole thing started, we would send out various email things, inviting people to webinars and so forth. And when you do that, you get these autoresponders coming back to you, telling you what happened with those emails. And frankly, not to a surprise to most of us here, a lot of them came back and said, hey, we're not here for a while. In other words, closed or effectively closed. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of companies didn't do that. I shouldn't say a lot, but many companies didn't do that. And they saw this as an extraordinary opportunity. And here's a great stat from Bain & Company. And those guys are marketing consultants. It's a very big organization. And here's what they learned. In business disruption conditions like we're in right now, and we've had some in the past, they found this. Studies have shown that about 20% of small businesses flourish with growth right now at the expense of the 80% that simply stick their head in the sand, wait it out, or worse yet, fail. business disruption, as we're in right now, isn't always a bad thing. It really isn't. I think what comes along with this is a lot of opportunity and, frankly, a lot of shaking out of businesses that maybe have no business being in business.
Mm-hmm.
So the companies that are going to hang in there and stick with this and carve out their market share, think of it this way. I mentioned some stats earlier, and maybe it pointed out that there's about 60% of the revenue available right now compared to last year at this time. So let's just go with that. Let's say there's 60% of the business available right now. If this stat from Bain & Company is anywhere near true and only 20% of the businesses are going after that 60%, guess what? If you're one of the 20%, there's more there for you to be gotten. So that's probably the best advice, Pat, I think I could give people is, recognize the opportunity here and these challenges we got, because there's certainly plenty of it there.
For sure. Chris Batch, what are your thoughts? Tangible advice for contractors?
Yeah, I mean, for me,
go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me? Making sure
Yes.
You guys can hear me. Great. I mean, for me, I think it has to do with what I'm seeing our most successful customers, using our platform combined with their CRM, segmenting customers and going back and talking to people they previously done business with. We're seeing that strategy work really, really well. I know 3 companies that I've talked to in the past, week that had their best month in April that they've ever had. And their strategy was, how can we, talk to customers that have bought from us in the past, because those are the ones that are going to spend money with us now. And so they put these pretty cool strategies together to offer this great financing that's pretty much unheard of. And to go back and say, hey, we're now doing these. We're now doing windows and doors. We used to only do roofs, and we'd like to start a conversation with you. So, at Hatch, we've seen people double down on that, and it's producing a lot of appointments, both virtual and in-home, but also a lot of revenue that's quick and easy to close. So in terms of like tactics, I'd recommend putting a strategy together to look at your database and figure out how can we make money and set appointments from the people we've already done business with, and it works. Right now, people trust that. And they are sitting at home looking at their home and saying, honey, we got to get the windows redone. It's about time we jump on that. Who should we use? They're going to use people they used before. So I recommend putting that strategy together today. I really do.
Great. Thank you. And Chris Palatroni of Modernize, your thoughts, your advice for businesses?
Yeah, I'll piggyback Chris and Tim a little bit. I liked what Tim said. This is just a good opportunity to be intentional. There's so many things to pay attention to, I think, in businesses. And I agree with Tim, adversity builds character. So it's a lot of how you look at these situations. It's easier to say be optimistic and whatnot, but I think at the end of the day, people want something that's a little bit more practical to work with. And so cliche is to say, but, take your thoughts, put them to paper. Think of what exactly you are trying to accomplish in your business. And it's okay if you want to be more reserved and that's where you feel safe, then there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the right decision for you, and for others, it's grab the bull by the horn. And so I would say, write your intentions down, prioritize your intentions, put your intentions that you've prioritized on a schedule or some sort of calendar, and just get at the work. But I think it's really important to have a map, if you don't have one already, of what you're trying to do. And so I think everybody kind of came into this year probably with some 2020 plans, if you will. I think it's safe to assume that most companies have had to recalibrate those plans. So just an opportunity to recalibrate, after Q1 and just make a plan. I think it's really that simple.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thomas Bash of Leap, tell us what your advice would be.
Yeah, I'll echo some of that sentiment. A lot of what I've heard from speaking to some of the top contractors is, they're leveraging the data that they've collected, right? And so having the best systems and processes in place to collect that data, whether it be, you're there for a roofing lead and a homeowner has a concern about their windows down the road or their siding may be frail. So collecting all that data when you're with the customer and notating things like, how long have you been in the home? Have you ever financed a project before? Have you ever done a home improvement project before? Collecting all that data is gonna set you up down the road when times like this come around, where you may need to lean back on some of the past business that you've won to to cross-sell and to upsell and to promote different promotions or packages that you have going on that relate to those customer needs. So really getting your systems fine-tuned, making sure that you're collecting all that data and storing it properly so that you have access to it in times like this.
Anthony, Gohn, financing's a big part of what needs to happen now, and technology has been a real aid in that area. So what advice do you have?
Well, beyond obviously getting yourself a Hearth subscription, I think that at a high level, the biggest thing to that I have as advice is we're in a crisis, and that means two things. Number one, it means that there's a lot of uncertainty around how long this crisis is going to be, and even though there's a good amount of optimism that we're going to be seeing some kind of return back to normal in the short term, that's fundamentally not certain. So I think my first piece of advice is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So if this thing comes back in Q4 and late Q3, you want to be ready for that. And this is a good time to do that. Number two, a crisis represents an accelerated reality. We all knew that home services business is going to need to digitize. That means have good digital credibility. That means have good digital alternatives, like what Leap is doing in terms of being able to present and offer your business. That means being able to offer financing to your customers. So I would use this as an excuse to get ahead of the curve or on the curve as far as applying technology to your business, because that's not going to rewind once COVID passes, and a lot of other businesses are going to go ahead and do that. So that's my biggest those are my 2 cents.
Got it, Anthony. A number of you have alluded to your interactions with contractors during this period, and I'm just curious. It is a little harder to win a deal. Lead flow is good, as Tim Mush said a moment ago. But as a jump ball to all of you, whoever wants to go first, are there some creative solutions that you'd like to highlight for this audience today that you've seen contractors have done to continue winning the deals, winning the business? So maybe the flow is there, maybe they're all digitized, but something's happening. The rubber's hitting the road properly in the right places. And if one of you guys want to jump in with that, I'll throw it open.
One quick thing just to kick it off is we've seen contractors who prepared marketing collateral that demonstrate how their businesses are making sure that they're under the right hygienic conditions to make homeowners feel safe, should the contractor approach the home or get the job done. So I think that making sure you have an internal process around that, and also that you're actually telling that story to your existing homeowners and prospective homeowners, is key in operating through a global pandemic like what we're seeing now.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Sure, happy to. And it's been talked about already, but certainly the whole remote selling thing has been all the thing here. Right. And it's been somewhat of a puzzle. I know one guy called it the wild, wild west, and it really is. Because it's one thing to think you can just hook up by Zoom and make a sale, but I think maybe, Tom, you mentioned the importance of really having that sales process down, no differently than you would have if you were in the home. And that's what I think is going on there with remote selling. A lot of people are skipping those normal steps of a sales process to be effective with remote selling. I think remote selling is going to hang around when this is done. I really do. When you think about it, a few years ago, no one could imagine you're going to buy a car over the internet. Imagine that. Now it's the norm. Heck, you can buy a car in a vending machine now. So I think it's going to stick around. Frankly, I think a lot of consumers might prefer that method of buying, once it's really refined. So it's going to stick around. I really think so. And secondly, what I've seen people that are successful out there and having record months, as I think Chris mentioned, is they have a program that they're using in their marketing here, and it's related to the COVID area. I saw a statistic recently that said consumers are welcoming, in 60% of cases, 62% of cases, consumers are welcoming marketing and advertising messages from companies that are empathetic with their message to the situation we're in. In other words, I'm not so sure consumers are liking companies going forth as business as usual. Their marketing is speaking to what homeowners are experiencing right now and being sensitive to that. And as an example, there's companies that do this. Let's just pick car companies. Hyundai has the assurance program. They're advertising like crazy. Ford has a built to lend a hand program. Kia has an accelerate to good program. Nissan, a measure of reassurance program. General Motors, the Shop, Click, and Drive program. And essentially what all those programs have is elements that help people through this as buyers. So I'm finding companies that are successful are creating a program. It includes remote selling. It includes the financing options that make it easy and takes the worry out of that. And those kind of things. And some companies are putting names on their programs like car manufacturers. And I'm thinking about one company said, stop the spread and save some bread or something like that. So I think there's companies that are doing that, that's resonating with consumers and working well.
Yeah, Tim, I'll add to that real quickly. I want to echo first, I guess, the sentiment that Anthony said. There was or is a wave, right? That you need to prepare for and be ready for. You don't just when a wave comes, you don't just jump on it and ride it out, right? You have to prepare for when that wave's coming in, and for a lot of people, they've been preparing for years with these, setting up a digital flow and having tech stacks and processes in place for something like this. But a lot of people thought it would be too hard to adopt, and I think what a lot of people are seeing now is they're kind of thrown into this, and they may have plugged a leak here and plugged a leak there to be able to adapt quickly to the current environment. But have you really solved what that core need is? So what I'm saying is there's still time to kind of catch what that next wave is, right? And yes, this pandemic's accelerated that growth for a lot of people, but make sure that you've taken the time to step back and actually address the core components of your processes. The other thing I wanted to add was that customers have been telling us that before they could maybe max out at 3 appointments a day, and they don't think everything's going to switch to 100% virtual, but a combination of the two may actually allow contractors to meet with homeowners at a time that's not 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out or a month out because of scheduling. Now they can accommodate 2 to 3 in-person meetings and maybe 2 remote meetings. So I think what we'll see a lot of is kind of a mix of these two going forward. So I'm excited to see what transpires in the next 6 to 12 months.
Well, thank you very much, Thomas. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to add one more thing there. I would also encourage a lot of companies not to think about the sale in the sense of taking the shot, right? Like as salespeople, we always want to take the shot on goal. And if anything that this has taught me, and I think we've all mentioned it in such a variety of different ways, is just this idea of nurturing the consumer, right? And whether it be with a CRM or how you engage with the consumer or what options you provide, just this element of even creating an opportunity to take the shot. Right. When I think of where contractors struggle a lot, it's when they're busy, right? And it's hard to systematize, if you will, the factory, treat each customer the same, create the long-term nurturing programs. And I think in this time right now, it's so important. A lot of guys are dipping into their Rolodex, if you will, and finding a lot of customers from past opportunities. So I would pay attention to kind of sharpening the axe, if you will. Like how do you give yourself the opportunity to take more shots on goal? And I think that bleeds into a lot of the concepts that we talked about earlier. One that even Tim brought up, which is a lot of people aren't playing ball. So if you keep your axe sharp and, you have good technology in there, processes to kind of adapt, if you will, you just get a lot more shots when a lot of other people aren't taking them. So.
Got it, guys. So I'm going to move ahead because we want a couple other topic areas that we want to cover before we throw it open to questions, and there have been a lot of questions being submitted, and I wanted to touch on the future changes that you think will be coming as a result of COVID, and then kind of from the other side of it, let's take the contrary point of view. How would you rationalize spending additional money on technology services when trying to cut costs? So there's a push and a pull here overall. What's happening. I'd like to cover them together in the next few minutes. So why don't we start with Chris Batch, if you could tell us a little bit about what you think the sorts of day-to-day changes in the industry you expect to see in the short and long term, and we'll start with you.
Yeah, appreciate it, Pat. Well, one is, a primary vehicle on our platform is text messaging. And our usage went from an hour a day in February to over 3 hours a day during COVID.
Wow.
3 hours a day of our customers, home improvement companies, on text messaging with their customers. That's a 180 difference of how contractors have talked to homeowners in the past.
Right.
I don't think that's going anywhere. I think that's going to increase, and I also think that there's going to be this extension of virtual appointments. There was a great question that was asked in the question area about virtual appointments close rate. And I think the general consensus is that the close rate's lower with virtual appointments. And the secret is in SaaS, which is what the businesses that everybody here's in, we've been doing Zoom sales calls for 15 years.
Right.
So for us, it's like business as usual, but for contractors, there are no talk tracks. There is no sales process. There are no technology stacks in place. And so they're going into virtual calls, almost staring at each other like it's FaceTime for the first time. And you're like, this is awkward. There's no talk track. So I think what I see happening is there's going to be some sort of inside sales participation from home improvement companies moving forward. Something where they'll have people inside that can get to the consumer and homeowner quicker than they ever have before, using text message, doing FaceTime, taking measurements remotely, and speeding up everything. Like, I think that's here to stay. It may not be half of your customer base, but I think it's going to be at least 25%. And I think like this, when you talk about new norm, it's just sped up. I mean, everybody said it today, but if you go from an hour of text messaging day to 3 hours in less than 30 days, like, it's just sped up that evolution, right? It's pretty incredible.
Got it. So I'd love a couple of you other folks to jump in here if you can. So day-to-day changes in the industry you expect to see in both the short and long term is the question. Just kind of fire it out there, and then we're going to roll into some others. So why don't we say, Anthony, why don't you jump in there if you have something?
Yeah, I would say one big change that we're looking forward to, and we've recently rolled out, is obviously traditionally a lot of contractors were using checks to be paid, especially in the smaller business category. And so we just rolled out a new payments product. It's limited to a small set of customers for right now, but that allows you to collect payments digitally. And I think you're going to see that basically dominate best practices, frankly, all practices going forward, because the check dynamic creates all sorts of issues, obviously for contractors, but especially in a context where people don't want to be, don't want you to drop by their home, etc. I think that's one big thing you can count on. And obviously, we can offer that product, but there are a lot of good solutions there.
Anthony, I'm going to stay with you for a moment, and then but people are being asked on this call to invest more in technology and to make these investments, and it's both time and it's money, in a time when maybe dollars are decreasing. So, what are your thoughts on how to approach that? So we're gonna ask both sides of the coin with everybody as we go around here. So go ahead.
I think it's not something, what we found is our customers aren't shy, but I would encourage people, when you're looking at a technology that you'd like to adopt, just ask them, what is the average return on investment that your customers see in the first period? We all have that data. We know what it is. Our teams know what they are. And I think just make sure that it's not a question of spending money, it's a question of investing money. And that you understand, because you wouldn't be the first person to do a product, what kinds of returns people expect and have seen traditionally. I think that's key. So doing your diligence, getting that data, everybody has it, is going to be really important when figuring out where to put your dollars to work.
Chris Palatroni, day-to-day changes that you expect to see, and what would you say to somebody who's hesitant at this time?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just this is change or. So I think we've all said it in a number of different ways. I didn't think I had time to invest in some of this, or I didn't think this was valuable, or I didn't think I could go virtual. Whether you choose to participate or not, I think homeowners are going to have a slightly different expectation moving forward. If I have the convenience that I can get a quote, it doesn't mean I will choose an online company versus somebody in person, but it's nice that I have the option. And you choose not to play ball there, you may not be sitting at some of these tables. So I think the big thing, both on the homeowner and the contractor side, and it really carries over to every element of their business, is this idea that their thought process has had to be stretched to some extent. They may not have participated in every element here. Some people are choosing virtual, some people chose to relocate people, some people chose to expand and whatnot. But I think people are realizing like, wow, you can. And not everybody's going to be one of those first adopters, if you will. So I think this kind of just paves the way through a forest the first time, right? Of like, wow, like maybe we could do this, right? But inevitably, I think anything we can do internally or with the homeowner to reduce friction, which is really what all of our services do when you think about it. It's just reducing friction. I jokingly put it on every presentation we have with clients, but I call it click to install, right? It's the click of a button, which is where Mod comes in and then funnels through Tim's CRM and interacts with Chris's Hatch and then moves through, Tom's Leap and then through the financing for Anthony, and voila, you get a customer. So anything you can do to reduce friction, it's a positive thing.
Got it. So, Thomas, thoughts on that topic there, which is basically day-to-day changes in the industry you expect to see in the short and long term?
Yeah, again, things that I've heard from speaking with contractors, one thing they say is, be the expert, right? When somebody calls you to get a quote on a roof or a siding or window, whatever it may be, they expect you to come in and be the expert in that. So the same comes true with how to deal with the current environment, right? Like, set the stage for what the appointment's going to be like, right? Is your team going to wear face masks? Are they going to wear booties if they go in the house? Are they going to? I had one customer, we talked to one contractor that actually carried around their own chair in their trunk. So set the process, be pretty strict on it. If you leave it up to the homeowner, they're not sure. They're new to this as well, and so as the expert, set that stage for what they should be expecting.
Tim Mush, what do things look like a year from now?
Yeah, a year from now, I think there'll be some residue left over from this, that's for sure. We already mentioned the sales process likely is going to evolve and some will stick. I think I agree with Chris, where he thinks maybe 25% of presentations might be virtual in the future, even when we're beyond this. I think that's probably right. But I also think we're going to have to rethink and relook at a bunch of lead generation things. It's going to force people to do that through the period we're in, because you had a lot of companies that did. Heck, there's some companies that do 400 events or shows a year. What are they doing for lead gen right now to replace that? And what they're forced to do is reallocate some funds, figure out some other things to get to where people are at right now. And frankly, where are they right now? They're at their home. They're at their computer. They're reading emails and texts. They're answering their phones. They're watching TV. They're looking forward to getting their mail. So direct mail might make a recurrence here. I think it will, actually. And they're thinking about their home and their future. And I think we're going to learn some things about that and lead generation through this period that will also stick and get us through. In terms of ROI, and when you're considering technology solutions, I got a graphic here. You probably can't read this, but what I got here is this is something a company does annually. It's a company called Chief Martech. And what they do is they look at the marketing technology landscape. And they go and find all the technology solutions that are available to everybody out there. And guess what? In 2020, there are 8,000. Every one of these things you can't read here is a company. And I'm sure many of our companies are on there. And the deal is this is growing like crazy. So what this causes companies that are on the event here today to look at that and go, oh my God, what do I select? And fortunately, you got a lot of folks on this particular session that have solutions that are industry specific. So that's thing number one to consider is when you're thinking about a technology solution, find one that works in your industry. Don't find one that works for Fortune 500 companies and try to adapt it to your business. It might be very difficult. So there's a lot of great solutions out there. The ROI, I think maybe one of you mentioned, it's very easy to consider ROI with some of these technical or technology solutions. So take a look at that and make decisions based on what can this do for me.
Got it. Okay, so I think what we're going to do right now is we're going to cover a lot of things in questions here. And we've got about 15 minutes left. We've got a number of people who are chiming in and asking questions. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity, though. Did I miss you somehow with one of the responses about either helping contractors overcome their confusion or fear or hesitancy, or about the future? Would anyone like to chime in on those topics? Or are we good to go? Okay. Seems like we're good to go. So let's move it then to questions from our audience. And I've got a couple earmarked, and many have been answered already in text form. So I'll throw a few out there. Here's a quick, easy one from Darcy Gunn. He's asking, will Leap and Hearth have integrations? So straight up.
Yeah, and Anthony, I'll start and certainly chime in. But yeah, at the end of the day, if my job as strategic partnerships manager is to add value where value is wanted, and so getting requests from contractors for integration partners is great, and we'd absolutely want to add that value by adding Hearth. So the answer to that is, if you want it, I'll work on adding it.
Bill Rossiter asked a question I think is very interesting. How do you think the product sample process will be handled in the new virtual selling world? And, Chris, I see you nodding your head there. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I mean, what we're noticing is virtual appointments where both people have cameras on close more. So this answers two questions. Any insight to the caveat to closing virtual sales presentations and then showing samples? I think you've got to both have the camera on. We helped one company. We partner with a Zoom competitor called Whereby right inside of our product. They were using that at first, but the salesman didn't have the camera on. So the homeowner space was showing, but the rep wasn't. And that's not a personal experience. And I think it affected their close rate. Then they made this is the process I'm talking about with sales that SaaS figured out 15 years ago. Then they said, hey, look, both people have to have the camera on so you can see them. You can walk around and see the home. You can interact with each other just like FaceTime. And then their close rate was able to increase. And I think the same goes for samples, right? While they can't feel it, you can at least have that on the camera to show them. And then we're noticing that what happens is that even then the close rate still struggles a little bit. You've got to have a follow-up process to every virtual appointment. There needs to be a cadence afterwards to get feedback from the customer on how the virtual appointment went and what are the things they thought were missing. And a lot of times that might be touching and feeling the sample. So it may result in an in-home. Just because it starts virtual doesn't mean it ends virtual. Hope that helps.
Yeah. Chris, let me add to that. I've I guess I've got a lot of experience in this thing, but what I'd say is, a lot of contractors, if you're still out there standing, like a scarecrow with two sample boards, that's sort of a thing of the past, right? There's a lot of technology out there, whether it's Hover's interactive 3D model, whether it's RentalWorks, whether it's, utilizing the resource section in Leap to show a digital PDF. There's a lot of ways to get around that sample thing virtually. And then to Chris's point, right, when it comes down to that final sale and they want to touch and feel a product, there's a great company out in Denver that starts process virtually and then mails a little sample box to the customer. So I think you can get really creative with that. But I'd say that there's a lot of alternatives out there to being able to showcase products virtually.
Anyone else have something on that, or we got that one covered? Okay, Jared Brown is asking a corollary to that question, and that's for in-home appointments, not virtual ones. What is sampling looking like today? So let's say you get in the home and you're making a technology presentation, but do you bring samples? Do you wipe them down? Anybody have thoughts on that stuff, or virtual ways to handle?
I'll just add that, again, presenting digitally is a great alternative. But certainly, if you're going to bring samples, I'd maintain all the hygienic approaches to that are out there today. But I think being digital with those type of resources is really convenient.
Michael Goldberg is asking, he's curious about the bounce rates on text messages, sort of like how email bounces and how they're tracked. Do you guys offer that kind of tracking for bouncing text messages?
Yeah, I think Michael was asking me, and I answered it, but it's a great question. So through our service, we actually scrub every telephone number against the carrier before we allow a text message to be sent. So the deliverability rate is in the 91st percentile. It's a little bit different than email because you have some checks and balances there. We also limit the amount of sends so that carriers don't blacklist you. And so we have several things inside of our platform that safeguards you guys to make sure your deliverability stays high. Great question.
Anyone thoughts on that? I guess you're the right person there, Chris. So another question that came across, and it talks about this difference between a little bit lower close rates in the virtual selling, and the question is it fair to say that the close rate difference is because people are not able to move forward, or are they waiting until after COVID settles down? So what's your sense of that? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll chime a little bit up from the homeowner perspective. I would just encourage people not to put their biases on the homeowner. I think it's safe to say everybody is cautious to a point. But honestly, put yourself in their shoes. Like, you ask to get a home improvement project that you probably knowingly think it's going to cost in the $10,000 to $20,000. There's a chance that you have a pretty good idea of how you're going to pay for that, even amongst COVID. So just remember, like, a lot of this stuff originates with the homeowner raising their hand, not you pulling them into the sandbox, if you will. I always just assume, like, if they raise their hand, like, they're a buyer, it's just our job to connect the dots. That'd be my 2 cents there.
I would add one quick thing, if I may, which is that don't forget about close rate maturity. So what we've seen is that, the last 9 weeks have come in many different punctuated periods, all of which have had very different characteristics. And so just because somebody doesn't close today doesn't mean they're not going to close. So I would just keep that in mind as you are managing through your leads. People may close as they start to feel more comfortable with COVID. They may see a value proposition. They just might be taking a little bit more time than usual to get there.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah, and last thing I want to mention real quick, Patrick, is some of the stuff that we do on our platform is we measure the actual conversation sentiment. The word waiting and the word COVID are only in the same sentence 2 out of 10 times, or 20%. That means 80% of the objections people are still getting aren't that. It might be pricing, it might be some other things, but you're not seeing that combination a lot, which tells us that there are some, but it's a smaller percentage. I think it's a lot of the traditional objections that are still happening out there, and you've got to don't make any assumptions. I'm with that. I think that's the right move.
We have a designer remodeler on the call. Her name is Catherine Chernay, and she's asking, as a designer, we tap material banks for sampling. Has anyone made the leap to 3D modeling for subcontractor and material calculations? So, obviously there's a bunch of stuff going on out there. I wonder if you folks want to answer that question.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think, go look at what Hover's doing. I know EagleView's got a 3D product. So I think that helps answer the question you're talking about with, being able to showcase different materials and gather measurements. Those two come top of mind. Got
it. So I want to go to just sort of an overall question for the panel, and we'll start with Chris Palatroni and move around. But what has most surprised you since the beginning of COVID, and when you think about home improvement and all that has happened in the last 9 or 10 weeks, Chris? What is the most surprising thing that you've seen happen? And we'll start with Chris Palatroni, move it to Chris back, and around the horn. So go ahead.
Yeah, keep in mind, my lens in the world in which I deal with is dealing with, very much like with you guys, Patrick. Most of our business is built off of the biggest contractors in the country. So it's not the biggest pool in the world. There's 500 contractors on our platform. 100 of them make up the bulk of what we do. And so we're dealing with the best in breed, if you will. And I think what I find the most interesting amongst these times is, when things are going great, everybody's pounding their chest. Everybody's, I'm the biggest, baddest in the room. And, there's a lot of ego involved in this industry, and rightfully so. When the going gets tough, though, a lot of those companies chose to or are choosing to not fight as hard for their employees. It's probably the best way of kind of saying it. And so I think this is just such a unique time where companies And we all talked about it, have an opportunity to seize a moment, if you will. But I also think that there's a tremendous amount of good brand equity that can be built right now, right? So when you're a home improvement company that uses this as a notch on your belt, if you will, I think that's a great story to kind of continue to build your legacy. And so I'm a little just surprised at how many companies aren't fighting as hard for everybody as they probably could.
In an interesting way to distinguish themselves, for sure, by doing that, as you point out, Chris. So,
yeah, huge.
Chris Batch, your thoughts? And before you answer, Chris Batch, we're going to put up a poll question while we're going around the horn with this most surprising development during the COVID era. And I'm going to put that poll question up, which is, for the panelists here, which products would you be interested in learning more about? So if you could get that poll question up there, thank you. And while we're listening to those answers, I want you all to submit your votes, and we'll take a look at those in a moment and make sure you get that information. So Chris Batch, continue on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's surprising, but I think at first we all went through some waves of emotion about, like, what is this going to mean to the home improvement industry as a whole? And I have not, me personally, I've taken on almost a customer success manager role at our company right now. Like, we moved from total growth mode to like customer success mode. What can we do to make our customers successful? I haven't talked to one home improvement company that hasn't furloughed in some form or fashion. 1, 5, 20 people, call centers, contact centers, reps. But at the same time, what surprised me is how hard a lot of our customers are fighting and basically saying, we expect May and June to bounce back. Home improvement hasn't been as affected as, let's say, travel. Imagine being Airbnb right now or something like that. And so, at first I was concerned that there was going to be this just massive tsunami of impact to the home improvement industry. But I think what's surprising is that because of a lack of travel, because of a lack of to do other things, and I mean, the only place people can really be for the next 6 months, I think, like, is home, which means I think people are going to start investing in their home and doing projects. And I've seen some really smart home improvement companies double down on that and like overinvest in that expected growth that at first was just fear. So it's been cool.
Got it. So Thomas, we'll go to you, and then Anthony and Tim to finish it out on this question of the most surprising thing that you've witnessed since the beginning of the COVID crisis.
Yeah, I guess the most surprising thing is just that the amount of demand that still exists, and I know Chris and the team at Modernize has touched on it, quite a bit. He had a good stat, like I think leads dropped maybe 2% month over month last month. And I thought that was really surprising. And it's echoed by the contractors too. They have, discussed, I've talked to them and said, what are you anticipating when we move out of this? And they said, what are you talking about? We're already out of it. Like they're seeing demand at the same levels as it was a year ago, if not higher. And so to me, that was the most surprising. I guess I had expected demand to diminish a little bit. And from what I'm hearing, it really hasn't.
Thank you. Anthony, your thoughts?
A very similar point. I think from our perspective, we saw record demand both for people signing up for Hearth, but also people using Hearth in April, which is not something I was planning for, although it was something that we were very pleased to see. I mean, it's as I said before, plan for the worst, hope for the best type dynamic, but especially as it relates to small businesses who traditionally haven't been able to offer financing and now are. We've just seen the adoption curve, both in terms of utilization, but also in terms of signing up and interest, go way up, and that was not what I was expecting.
Thank you, Anthony. Tim Mush, you're going to wrap it up for us today with your thoughts. Most surprising development through COVID.
Yeah, I think actually a pleasant surprise, and what that is watching these innovative companies tackle head on what we've all been thrown here and react in a manner that's actually extraordinary. If you go look at some of these companies' websites that are killing it out there and how they've adapted them and made changes and things such as that, it's really quite amazing. And I think the reason a lot of those companies have been successful with this I'm thinking of a quote, I think it's from Winston Churchill, and I think what he said is, perfection is the enemy of progress. And I think a lot of companies aren't really moving forward because they want to make sure to get everything perfect first with their digital selling, remote selling thing. And you can't do that because we're all kind of plowing through this and we're having to react very quickly to it. And the companies that realize that they don't have to have things perfect, they just got to dive in, get their hands dirty, and figure out these processes because they're different. So it's actually been quite extraordinary to watch this, and a lot of stuff is being learned.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. We've answered a lot of questions we hope for you. There's going to be a recording of this conversation available, but on behalf of Chris Batch, CEO of Hatch, Chris Palatroni, co-founder of Modernize, Thomas Bash at Leap, Tim Mush of Market Sharp, and Anthony Gohn of Hearth. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Pat O'Toole. I'm with Qualified Remodeler Magazine. We wish you the best of luck. We're encouraging you to use technology to fight your way through this continuing crisis and these challenges, but a lot of opportunity exists already in the industry, and I think that's the main message, that there's even more available when you start incorporating and trying with some of these new technologies that are available. So thank you all. We're going to end the call at this time, and we look forward to seeing you again on some future call. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Pat.